No, I'm really excited to be here as well. I think podcasting is one of those mediums that is a very one-to-one type medium, right? Even though it's at scale, you can really feel up close and personal with people who are on there in a way that you really can't in any other medium. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just the audio, and maybe it's the way that people communicate when they're on a podcast. Maybe it's just the audio quality, but I don't know. It's just one of the best ways to really. I mean, particularly, I'm seeing a lot of scope for. Maybe this is just as a person with a B2B business. I'm seeing a lot of scope for marketing with B2B podcasts because traditional marketing in the B2B spaces is very difficult. Everyone's doing the same things. They're writing blogs, they're writing like ebooks. They're asking for your email to download the ebooks, and then they're sending you an email sequence like, hey, buy my stuff, talk to my sales team. So what I'm seeing is a big revolution in the B2B software industry, where what's happening is like every company is becoming like a media company first, right? Where they're first trying to create a Netflix like, ideally Netflix like brand in their B2B space, where they are seen as real thought leaders, right? They're seen as people who have content that can actually captivate, engage, and like make the listener feel like their product and the problem that they're solving is something worth talking about, something worth understanding, because that's the reason most of the products don't scale. It's because most people just don't care about the problem they're solving, right? So that's the biggest problem. So I'm seeing this kind of podcasts, great high well produced videos put on like platforms like Vistia or Vimeo. That's why I'm seeing the rise of like audio plus video content, which is designed to captivate the attention of the B2B audience. That is what is an amazing trend, and it will keep going on in the next few years at least. So with that in mind, what I'd love to talk about here on this session is more of a tactical approach on how to make your podcast successful, with a approach on with a proper sales led approach on how to get guests for your podcast. Because one of the things that I believe, like, I'll just share my screen here and take you through some of the things that we have. One of the things that I clearly believe about podcasting is that it's like everything else, it's sales. Yeah, everything is sales. It's not like, even if you think you're not in sales, you're in sales. Yeah, that's one of the things that sales is. It's a job that everyone eventually does, and you just don't realize you're doing it, right? You like, if you're an engineer, you have to sell your idea to your boss, like, okay, I'll just build this, I'll build this way, right? Or if you're in marketing, you have to sell a particular idea to both your audience and your boss. So it everything is sales, and in podcasts especially, it's like a startup, right? Like, because you have to produce episodes, and you have to do a lot of juggling, and you have to book guests consistently, book great guests consistently. So you have to think about this. If you really have to get top notch guests on your podcast, you have to think of it like salespeople think of a funnel, where they have leads and then ultimately close deals. The deal in this case is just a guest coming onto your podcast and talking to you. But in their case, a deal could be like a monetary thing, where they sort of the prospect pays money, and then he's converted to a customer. So there's very clear parallels I see, at least coming from sales. Like, when you're a podcaster, you should think of funnels. You should think of, okay, these are the 100 people that I'm going to approach in a non-pushy way. That's super important. In a non-pushy way, to appear on my podcast. Some people, for example, let's say LinkedIn, right? you find out like, okay, these are the 100 people these are my dream guests, right? Like I want all of them on my podcast. Obviously you can't land all 100, right? That's not
Every podcaster ever has that
that's
list.
a dream list. Yeah. So what do? You start with a funnel approach. You start with that funnel of 1,000 people who might be decent fits. Like 100 of them might respond to you. 10 of them might actually appear on your podcast. So you see this funnel approach, funnel thinking that was introduced in the sales world. It's very it's very relevant. It's very relevant to how podcasters should think about guest booking, because ultimately, a lot of success of a podcast is down to the quality of people that are coming on, right? Like if you're a amazing host, that's great. You can carry it forward for really long. But just think of like Joe Rogan, right? Do you think his podcast would have done so well if he wasn't consistently booking people like Elon Musk, and doing weed with them and all of that other stuff on his podcast? So
No way. And just like any, it's a give and take. It's that
yeah.
conversation. It's what makes podcasting so unique as a medium.
Yeah, it's a conversation, and the quality of the conversation will definitely depend on the guest, no matter how amazing your personality is. Like Joe Rogan is really funny, and he's really he reads a lot of stuff, and he brings up interesting topics. But it's like a game of how do I put it? It's like a game of tennis. There's a back and forth. If there's no back and forth, the quality of the conversation is just not there. So I would say, like, I think getting great guests is one of the I would say it's the biggest factor in making your podcast successful, because the quality naturally just goes up if you have a great guest.
Yeah, and I would piggyback off that, saying that at Zencaster specifically, we see our guests having a 5 to 10x reach of the host. And to say to prove your point exactly, which is leveraging those connections in order to move forward and grow exponentially. Truly, it is by each guest, you are taking a segmentation of their audience, and converting them hopefully to your content if it's interesting. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I mean, bu- I did podcasting for a while as well before I went into B2B software. I used to run this podcast called the Cold Outreach Success Stories. And, I didn't do it as a podcaster. I'm frankly not a podcaster. I haven't done a lot of it. But what I wanted to do with the podcast was to really understand what are the problems people are facing in the sales world, right? When they're doing cold outreach to close deals, frankly. So I got on some amazing guests, and they became friends, and I stayed in touch with them. And when I launched my software company, those were some of the very first customers that I converted, because I had gotten in touch with them. I knew them. I knew the process they were using for running their sales ops, and I knew exactly the pain points that they had, right? So it wasn't just about I didn't envision it as that, like I would just invite them and I'll sell to them later. It's just something that happened. But yeah.
That's the thing about podcasting, is it becomes there's a connection, as you said at the beginning, between the two of us. We've never met before, and yet we are already diving deeply into a conversation that we can both tell. We're
Right.
coming at it from two different perspectives. There's marketing, there's sales, there's platforms, there's software, and yet altogether we understand the ecosystem is unique and changes, and that all comes through that connection.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I was surprised that so many of them actually bought the software, because it was so bad when we started. Because you can understand, like, softwares initially in the very first alpha beta phase, there's like breaking all over the place. But they somehow placed their faith in me that me and my team would be able to develop a good software. And I would say podcasting was a big part of that. And not just that, they actually amplified the message on their social media, like, okay, this is a cool software, we're using it, and it's great for getting running your outbound sales process. So I even ran that podcast for a while till I got too busy with the software company. Like I ran the podcast for a while just to understand, like, get more people on, because I think it was a very deep dive into the nitty gritty of how to get great results from outbound sales in different industry. And I I used to take the best learnings from them, and used to run the same process both for my business and for my podcast. to get the best kind of results for um, the best kind of guests, best kind of deals for the company and the podcast. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that podcasting, and I'll talk about it a little bit more when I throw up something on the screen. I think that there are so many different components to having a successful podcast, and
Mhm.
there's so many different specialties, for lack of a better word. If we're thinking about it as a startup or
Mhm.
a successful or larger corporation, we're
Mhm.
talking about many different divisions of any of those
Yeah.
companies together in order to put out a podcast. It's a
Yeah.
large undertaking, and exactly as you said, many of them fall by the wayside despite their applicability or usefulness. Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's a lot of work. You have to book
Yeah.
people, you have to do research, you have to think through what do you want to talk about, what will resonate with your potential audience,
Yeah.
and like you said, get it approved by quote unquote. In this situation, the boss is you, the boss
Yeah.
who's that podcaster or who you're working for. It's quite an undertaking for each and every podcaster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's essentially a B2B media business or a media business. It's
So
not
so
B2B.
well put. So
The
so well.
media. Yeah. It's not just a podcast. You're just reducing it maybe by even calling it a podcast, because there's a lot of business related stuff that you have to do under the hood to make sure an episode goes out, it gets amplified on social, it gets synced to a lot of like the hosting platforms and all of that stuff. So even the ops part, the booking guest part, the approvals and everything, it just reminds me of a proper a media business, right? Like you have to do the same thing to produce a piece of news that goes on the TV. So I mean, you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same amount of work a journalist would, and that's his full-time job. So yeah, it's a very it's a very interesting undertaking for people to do this on a regular basis. So what I would love to do now is just go a bit deeper into the tactics, right? Like the hows, exactly how of getting great guests, and what should your funnel look like, what are the kind of innovative approaches that people are using. And I will really come to it from a sales perspective, because I think booking guests, I'll focus on the booking guest part. It's mostly sales, and you can engage people. If you can engage people in a good conversation before you have asked them to come on the podcast, you'll get a higher chance of conversion. So I'll just share my screen and take you through some of those. So the business I run is called Senzilla. Remember, it's like Godzilla but with Sen. And we really help you get into good conversation, ideal prospects on LinkedIn, right? So if you're a busy podcaster or person, you just don't have the time to do a lot of LinkedIn outreach consistently. And if you don't have the time, you won't get a healthy funnel. As simple as that, right? If you have a list of 100 dream guests and you're not reaching out to, at least 10 new people a day, then you won't get that whole healthy looking funnel where out of 10, 3 connect, 1 response, 3 connect, 1 response. So until this whole consistency thing is taking place, you won't really see the funnel of results, right? That's the number one thing. This is something we've already talked about. Everything is sales, even hosting a podcast, or I should just cross it out and say even creating a media business. Of course, everything is sales. Now the biggest thing is why LinkedIn, like why do it this way. So LinkedIn is one of those channels that is very underrated for everything, right? Like its usage has grown about 2400% since the March 2020 when the pandemic started. And if you want to get good guests and you want to identify who would be a great guest for my podcast, they've got the most advanced filtering system, right? Like what kind of jobs they're doing, what kind of speakers they are, what kind of keywords appear in their profile. So it's one of the most advanced databases of high value, high net worth people, or where you can actually find search and filter and get the right people who you want to talk to. Why automate it? It's nearly impossible to do it manually, and the biggest reason is the follow up, right? Like if I was doing LinkedIn outreach by hand, I would just give up, because people, everyone's busy. No one responds, and before you've sent them at least 3 or 4 follow-ups within a space of, like, 2 weeks. That's what we do. We send 4 follow-ups over a space of 2 weeks, automatically. We don't, do it by hand. So the reason for that is that you have to, again, like, there's so many podcasters that I've talked to that, let's say that, hey, I'm just not able to get guests on my podcast. I've tried everything. I've tried reaching out via blog, tried reaching out via email and all of that. And the first question that I always ask is, like, how much follow-up are you doing? So they're like, oh, I've sent them a reminder email and all of that. I was like, no, you really need to think of it as a process, right? You put in at least, 10 to 50 people. This is a bit much for podcasting. Maybe for you it could be 10 to 50. You put in 10 to 50 people in your new funnel every day, and then you follow up 3 to 4 times with everyone that connects. That's real effort, right? Because you're consistently doing it. You're just not, giving up. And this actually, using automation actually sort of eliminates that feeling of, okay, this person is not even replying to me, because what's happening is the robot doesn't have feelings, right? It doesn't get hurt. It just does follow up. Does that make sense?
So much sense. I mean, I think taking away the robot doesn't have feelings. About the sales funnel as we're talking about it in relation to podcasting, it's removing that failure feeling is probably just one of the things that I think would make it easier to grow your podcast and consistently, like you said, the bookings get easier, the traction gets easier, and all of that weight that has been put onto the robot, that emotional,
Yeah.
toll, what all podcasts take,
Yeah.
it's taken away. And that liberates you to do what you actually like, which is podcast.
Yeah, let me actually show you a real conversation. I think that will help you
Please, because as you're going to do right now, look at our messages. Me and you, I'm sure, have the exact same thing. If I'm signed in on 6 different businesses, there's so many different inboxes and so many different conversations.
Yeah, so I'll show you one where it actually we actually did end up closing a deal, but I'll show you the emotional weight of how it actually works. So I'll come to it later in Senzilla, but we actually have an AI system that reads the prospect's profile, or in your case, the prospective guest profile, and says something nice to them based on what it finds in their profile. So, for example, it found that this guy had a great recommendation from some person on his profile, right? So it just gave him a compliment in the connection message, like, nice profile, John. Particularly like the glowing recommendation from this person. Hope you'll consider connecting. No pitch, right? All I'm doing is just being nice. Just that I'm not being nice using my time. I'm being nice using my AI software, right? Artificial intelligence software. So that's the first step. Now, he doesn't respond to it. He connects, but he doesn't respond. I send a follow-up automatically. This is Senzilla. I usually active on LinkedIn. How do you find it on here? I'm just trying to have a conversation with him. I'm not even pitching him to buy my stuff or come on my podcast. No response. 2 days later, another follow-up, simple discovery question. Do you use LinkedIn as a channel for lead gen? No response. 3 days later, no response. It's a more powerful platform. Have you thought of using social selling? Absolutely crickets, no response. I send this as well. This is automated as well. So we have some capabilities where you can send basically like images in the LinkedIn chat automatically. And what it does is that pulls his name and writes it on the coffee cup here. This has my name on it. This one was blank. It wrote his name on it.
Very cheap, so salesy, so smart. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm already waiting for a coffee with you joining. So he doesn't respond to that as well. 3 days later, did you get a chance to look at my previous message, John? He finally responds after 6 follow-up over a space of 2 weeks. Hey Sam, feel free to tell me more. Send me a video where I like describing what you can do and how. And we did get into a deal later. Like, I'm 100, 200% sure if I was doing this by hand, I would have given up after step 2. Because it just becomes so emotionally draining to be doing this for multiple prospects. This is not the only prospects that I'm talking to, right? So that's why sales is hard, and since guest booking is sales, that's why guest booking is hard, right? By extension. So yeah, I mean, that's why it's so important to just have a process, right? Like, I'm not saying use my software. This is not a sales pitch. All I'm saying is, like, think of it as a process. Just make sure that you're either just blocking all your emotions and doing at least 3 or 4 follow-ups, and 10 to 15 new reach outs every day, or you're using some software to take out the emotions bit. And why now? Because a lot of other channels have closed. Yeah, right now, like trade shows, conferences, and events aren't happening. Events are happening, but virtual. It doesn't sort of, virtual events don't get you the same feeling, right, as a real event. But you still need guests, so you need to look at something else. So that's the number 3, right? Why us? Like, I'll tell you why us, like, if you eventually choose to go with us, if anyone here does. So I'll and with why us, I also want to illuminate, like, why we have created certain features. Like, why is guest booking or sales so hard, and why is it so important? Like, exactly like you were saying, you're managing 5-6 businesses, and it's hard to manage conversations. The LinkedIn inbox makes it easy for you to lose relevant conversation in a sea of irrelevant messages. Like, you saw it in my own inbox, right? It's so hard to find the right message. And it's a huge time sink. You can't send 50 to 100 new connection requests and do follows by hand. And most existing tools are actually unsafe. LinkedIn can detect that you're doing too much activity, and they can ban your account, which is something you don't want to happen. And they get you low connection acceptance rates. I feel this is the biggest problem. People, they send out a connection request, and they would, spend a lot of time looking at the person's profile and writing something. But most people actually don't connect with you, right? Just because they're busy, or they're not on LinkedIn that often, or for some reason that's not just not your fault, right?
I would say
So
it's it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you a little. I having been on LinkedIn, and so to say a little bit about myself, I worked in social media platforms, TikTok, then worked in
Mhm.
advertising technology
Mhm.
with programmatic, and then have now moved to Zencaster. So thinking about the B2B sales funnel itself and LinkedIn, as you said, you think about that maturity over the last 5 to 7 years. That is the
Yeah,
issue, really, is that me and you have had tens of thousands of outreaches come through our inbox. And when we
yeah,
signed up for LinkedIn, probably in 2012, 2013, we're like, this
yeah,
guy probably took the time and the care to answer
yeah,
each one, because there was only one or two. But now that
yeah,
we've opened it up to automation and AI, like you said, humans can recognize AI, because
yeah,
there is that intangible humanality that we all have, that
yeah.
extra 5% that the computer still struggles with. That is the level of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
yeah.
true.
But
So
but
true.
that's where it gets interesting. Like, just look at this real conversation that I had with a real person. I think it's not like planted or anything.
Mhm.
Like, so this is AI written, right? What it did was, it went into this person's profile and found some volunteer work that he had done. He said, your profile looks very impressive. It's great that you've given back to the community along with your professional achievements, like volunteering at this place, Rock Up and Sync. I would love to connect. He comes back and says, thank you, Sam. Nice to see you've done your research and found some intelligence in my profile that you can use to make a human connection. That means you already stand head and shoulders above the other thousands of people who try to connect. I also see that you have a niche in helping small business owners like myself accelerate their leads and through LinkedIn, which means I've been specifically targeted, not part of blanket campaign. Now, I felt so bad while reading this reply because this was completely automated, right, by the AI. Um,
Felt bad, but at the same time, you give yourself a big pat on the back, because that
yeah,
is,
but
that's the definition of doing
yeah,
it right. That you
exactly.
that you stimulated, just even like you said, when we're talking about a funnel, even if this is coming through 1 out of 1,000 times, this is an
Yeah,
obvious warm lead. If we're talking
yeah,
sales, like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
hand this to your boss and your salespeople and know that we're tracking in the right direction with this person. We've already
yeah.
gotten off to a right, still the good start.
Yeah, we'll close him. I was like, we'll close him within like a week. It's that simple now, because the first step was right. Like, the AI did its job. So that's the beauty of AI, right? It keeps evolving, even though it's so. I'll tell you why I'm so biased with AI. I am actually an engineer by training, and my training is in applied artificial intelligence. I used to work in research before this, and I completely see how, like, don't confuse with Elon Musk or any of those people who are making like crazy predictions. But AI will get good. AI will get good. It's just a matter of like it has gotten really good over the past couple of years, and just give it like 3 or 4 more years, it'll get unrecognizable, right? Over.
I have to totally agree. I mean, you think
Yeah.
about TikTok, for example, and the For
Yeah.
You page. That is the definition of an AI learning and molding around each individual user and understanding how one algorithm can now apply to millions and therefore serve those millions the content that is needed. And if we're talking about it from a business point of view,
Yeah.
the brands can now understand these are the people that I need to associate with in order to reach said target audience. Yeah, no, it is. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it gets a bad rap, AI and ML. And for those of us who are startups, we understand that there are, at least from my point of view as a marketer, as a social media person, first and foremost, before going into the other fields, I know that there are so many corners that we can cut to save
Yeah.
creators time, to get them further down the pipeline with tools exactly like this for podcasting. It's so true.
Yeah, I mean, see, it's not about fooling anyone or making sure, like hoodwinking them into coming onto your podcast or something. It's just about time, right? Like you can't do everything, right? You have to choose. You can't do 3 or 4 follow-ups. You can't, come in every day and just start with sending manual connection requests, going to their profile, clicking connect, writing a note, researching their profile to create a note. It's great if you do it. Like I'm sure if you do it personally, you'll get a better message than this, right? Like better message than what this AI wrote, because it's just picking up one element of it, right? The volunteer work. But if you do it, I'm sure you'll get better. But ultimately, like with everything, it's about time, right? Automation and AI, they exist to save human beings time, right? And still be able to carry out the jobs that you want to do. You want to get guests, but you don't have times to follow up and write out personalized messages. So that's where you use softwares which have these, um, capabilities.
I mean, it's the sustainability really of be
Yeah.
able to create this artwork. To think about it for Zencaster's point of view, there's so many times that I speak to creators who are super
Yeah.
successful
Mhm.
podcasters. We would judge them as successful podcasters, and yet they have another job.
Yeah.
Many of them have another job. Or if they are podcasters alone, they probably have other business ventures and they have a team who's helping them put together that podcast. That
Correct.
sustainability and the repeatability, as we
Mhm.
know, where the podcast just gets better and better. I think there was a stat from Podlines, I believe, on Twitter, I think a couple weeks ago that was shared. We were talking about if you've gotten past X amount of podcasts, you're already in the top 10% of all podcasts. If you've gotten
I
past 10 to 15 episodes, like for past your first season or two, you are literally already in the top 10% of podcasts, just from a sustainability point
survive.
of view. It's like
Yeah.
that, as you know, if you can apply the sales methodology to that
Yeah.
kind of creative outwork and output, it's a game changer. You will separate yourself without ever having to lift as many fingers.
Yeah, and the biggest problem I think is the left brain right brain thing, right? Like most podcasters are very creative. I don't know which part that is, left or right, versus a lot of salespeople and people who run sales funnels are very analytical. They just think in terms of funnels. Okay, I sent out 100 outreaches this month. Whatever, 1,000 outreaches this month. I'm getting like an average 30% connection rate, and okay, with this I'm getting like 30% response rate, and with this funnel I'll be able to maybe get 10 guests, 10 good guests. So having that funnel thinking in mind as a podcast host or someone who's running a media business, essentially it's a true differentiator, because that's something that I feel a lot of people just miss, right? They don't think in terms of funnels. They think, oh, I have to get guests. I call it like there's random acts of kindness. There's random acts of efforts towards guest booking. Yeah. So it's not really a process, right? And that's why there's no repeatability. So you have to really think of it as a sales funnel, and that's why it's so hard, right? Because there's so many elements where you can go wrong. And I'm just talking about guest booking here. There's a bunch of things where you can go wrong, and that's where like this is not meant to discourage you at all. I'm just saying like the thinking needs to evolve a bit if you want repeatability.
I totally agree, and I think it shouldn't be a deterrent. I think it's a disclaimer when it comes
Yeah.
to podcasting, and I want to educate people as to understanding like starting a podcast is not easy, and let alone just coming up with the idea and starting to put it in place and get your microphone and going to host it. Understand if you're going to use a tool like Zencaster to record it, if you're going to use a tool like yours to book guests. It's have thought of already. And that is
Yeah.
before you've even gotten out of the gate.
For sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, it's yeah. I have done it in the past, but it wasn't like a high production value thing. It was more of like, okay, the content is so good because I was able to get great guests who were real practitioners of the craft, right? Like cold outreach, real people who created amazing funnels. So I just was able to find them using my own process on LinkedIn and just ask them to come on, like just share with me the funnel that they've created. But I completely agree with you on how much work that was. I didn't estimate it going into it. Otherwise, like I would have focused. Yeah. So that's why I had to give it up eventually as well. Like it became just too much work with running the software business as well as the podcast. I was
It's
like, okay, yeah.
there
I'll,
is there is there is so much room to improve the process for so many different steps of podcasting in general. To, for lack of a better word, make it a little bit more salesy.
yeah.
Understand how to market it better. Understand how to distribute it better.
Yeah.
For my obviously expertise, social media is something that really surprised me when I joined the podcasting world.
Mhm.
Podcasts by have one or two social media channels. Almost.
Yeah.
That as a social media point of view, if we're going to apply it to the same kind of funnel analysis, is ridiculous, because if you add 2 or 3 other channels, even if you're engaging with people each time you put out a new episode, that
Yeah.
will, that taxonomy will grow. You will gain
Yeah.
1
Yeah.
more follower, 2 more followers, 5, and then 10, and then 15 and 25. We've all seen these like graphs and stats when it comes to social media. You use the right hashtags, you have to incorporate the right links, you have to understand what is not clickbait, but what is attractive to someone. Think about from outside of your own shoes. Take yourself
Yeah.
out of being that creator and understand like who will actually care what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Why will
Yeah.
they care? And how do I present that as quickly as possible so that they understand 30 minutes time in something that's going to teach them something.
Right, right. That's so important, and I think there's a couple of very important points in there that you've mentioned. The first thing is the second order audience, right? The audience that sees you and then they love you. They actually tell a lot of people, right? There's a lot of hidden word of mouth that you can't attribute to any social, right? It's just like people's organic networks in their lives. And the second thing that you mentioned was quickly show them value. The quickly part is super important because everyone's attention spans are just dropping, right? Like TikToks are what, 15 seconds max. There's a reason for that, right? It's because you can't focus now, since everyone's been conditioned by social media. You can't really now focus on anything. Like you want a quick dopamine hit within the first 10 seconds of you viewing the content. Yeah. So that's why your bites need to be styled well with some, like previews need to be styled with something like a wave or something, where they have the waveforms and the voice and the lyrics, the subtitles going over the preview. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of elements, small elements that have a big impact over time to take care of. So that's why it's so hard. Yeah. Like every little bit of the of the process needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it is really one of those things where if you have to do all 100 steps in order to do it correctly. Any misstep along that way, even from the beginning to the end, is a waste of time, which is a waste of money, and it's a waste of productivity. It's quite a conundrum that faces podcasters right now. There is no out of the box solution for all of this stuff.
Yeah, I used to think of this, like I used to think of startups as this. Like I teach I whenever like some people from my network come to me and ask about startups and all of that. I tell them, startups or any media business like this, Rube Goldberg machine. Have you seen that, where A
Yes.
happens, then B happens, these fancy stuff. Now
Yes.
the wow factor in this doesn't work if any of these steps fail, right? Like there's no wow factor, right? Like you see this like Rube
I
Goldberg
really
machine.
couldn't agree more. The feedback loop I will talk about a little bit is it's
Yeah,
just it's broken. There's so many portions of podcasting that have not fully matured.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely, as this industry evolves, we'll get more, all-in-one tooling standards and all of that. But yeah, it's really interesting where it is right now, and it's still come a long way. I think 5 years ago, the ecosystem wasn't like half as mature as it is now. So it's definitely
Oh,
gonna.
100%. The quote I give to many creators is that if I'm looking at podcasting as an ecospace and what the landscape really looks like from a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional view, it is Instagram in 2012. We
Yeah.
have started, and it goes much deeper than just that concept. Think about the technology. The
Yeah.
technology for podcasting, specifically like Zencastr's VoIP. The reason
Mhm.
Josh Nielsen, our founder, built it is because it didn't exist before. The
Yeah.
more modern browsers, as they came out in 2012 and 13, when he was
Mhm.
testing it on other things, understood, wow, there is now an ability through a browser instead of an app,
Yeah.
instead of a downloadable software of some kind, to talk to each other and record it and have high quality wave audio, MP3, and now MP4s,
Yeah.
and MAV files. It's so crazy. And to think about, we, as you said, still have, we've come so far, but we have so much more to go. Mobile has not been rolled out by many podcasting platforms.
Mm.
It is a struggle from many different points. And yet at the same time, if we think about internet accessibility for people in
Mm.
third world countries specifically, we think about people with mobile phones. The mobile phone most likely has a better camera than many of their
Mm.
computers, especially ones that you can afford in lower income countries. So
Correct.
all those voices are already under the threshold of getting out. It's
Mhm.
I feel like, and I think we're both of the idea that we are getting very close to the exponential growth curve. You can see it
Yeah.
in the monetization strategies for the biggest podcasters. You can see it Smartlist making $80 million to sell their rights to Amazon Music.
Yeah.
We are almost at that moment when podcasting is going to reach its full maturity. And to go cultural, I think it's the TikTok and Instagrams of the world kind of made us see things through a lens and in a
Yeah.
more basic version, for lack of a better word, because of the way it's
Mm.
presented to you. Podcasting essentially is a conversation between you and the host. They are
Yeah.
telling them and that guest, and you are just listening in like a fly on the wall, whether it's through your earbuds or visually. It's
Yeah.
it's encapsulating. It truly is, and I think we can all I think most adults want to learn as opposed
Yeah.
to be more superficial. Podcasting
Mhm.
allows you to do that about anything, whether I'm an F1 fan or you want to talk about software and sales. It's
Yeah.
there's a room and a niche for both of us and all other podcasters in between.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. The Instagram in 2012 movement, that's exactly it. I completely agree with that. And like this is something that I tell people who are selling on LinkedIn as well. Like LinkedIn reminds me of Facebook 2012, uh, or Facebook sort of 2010. Yeah, before it really took off in the next 5 years and became like a like still like a lot of people are still on LinkedIn just to sort of, they're just not active, but now they're becoming active with the pandemic and like changing their jobs and all. Like people go to LinkedIn when they're changing jobs, to be honest, like busy professionals, that's when they do it. So but now it's becoming more of a social media platform because you're just trying to you know they're just trying to be more present, like create more of a network so that whenever they need to switch a job or something, they have some conversations built up already, right? Some people who they comment on, right? Whose post they comment on, and all of that stuff, so that later on, whenever they're looking for a job change, they're able to find it more quickly. So yeah, I mean, even the sales processes and the platform on which you do sales, they have a natural life cycle as well, right? They evolve, they die, right? A lot of, like, look at Quora. I mean, Quora used to be so great once upon a time, but now it's just not good, right? So
I
there's
mean, it's the platform maturity and for lack of a better word, to use the 2021 version, it's the clubhouse
yeah,
effect. It's you go
yeah,
too close to the sun and
yeah.
the network becomes defined by what it is, as opposed
Mhm.
to slower maturity, as many I think podcasting in general has
Yeah,
achieved, which is there's tons of podcasts already. There's tons of successful podcasters. And yet it is not, it's only just becoming accessible to the wide stream. It's only either A, to start a podcast, or B, to listen to podcasts. People, if you look at it statistically, year over year over year, I go back to the Instagram 2012 thing. It's the same. I sit in meetings at Zencaster, and I think I'm looking at the same slides I looked at 7 or 8 years ago when we were studying social media platforms, because we are so closely mirroring the exponential growth curve of users, of shows, of popular power users, that top 5 or 10%, and then the monetization underneath all of them. It's as you said, platforms come and go, but the movement itself of podcasting is, it's going to be there. So it's a question of which platform is going to come and meet it.
Right. No, I completely agree. And there's a lot of great contenders. So, like on the software side as well, it's a software and tooling side in general. It's a great sort of position to be in, right? Like a lot of big businesses getting interested, like Amazon Music and Wondery and all of these. So it's actually pretty interesting to see what's happening with big business. When big business jumps in, those are real people in real suits who have done a lot of real analysis. So they understand that there's money here, right? And then they make a call based on that. It's not like they just spend money just because they have it, right? They make strategic bets. So that's one of the reasons to get excited as well, because it's validation that big business is looking at it, right? Like Amazon Music is taking this seriously.
I really do agree. When the big companies get in, I remember at TikTok at one point, we ran a campaign for Unilever, and it was definitely a seminal moment, because it takes you from like, hey, we have a platform with 50 to 150 million people coming on a month, and they're creating tons of content and they love it, and we can see the amount of time they spend in the app is going up. But until you figure out a way to monetize something and understand what hashtag challenge doesn't mean anything, until I made it so that Unilever and hashtags came together, and then it grows exponentially out of that. It's so interesting to think that this is the exact same thing that's going to happen with podcasting. The ability to link brands and audiences via our softwares, and enable hosts with those softwares. It's going to be an exponential growth curve, because the threshold to becoming a podcaster will become lower and lower in developing countries and in, let's say, more podcasting mature countries.
I completely agree. All right, so I'll get back to this
please.
really quickly. Yeah, so it's basically more nitty gritties, like how do we solve these problems of how to get better connection acceptance rates, how to manage conversations, how to spend less time on it, and how to keep your LinkedIn account safe. So what you have in the software, or what you should look for whenever you go and look at any of this software in this space, is that you should think in terms of campaigns. Like you're running a campaign to audience one. Exactly like you do in an ad sale, right? Like when you run Facebook ads, you define an audience, that this is what I want to go after. You optimize for audiences. So you want to optimize for a particular audience on LinkedIn. Like just search for example, let's take a real example here, right? You're running a podcast on e-commerce, just as an example, and you want to talk to like e-commerce managers. So with this, you get an idea of, okay, these could be good e-commerce managers to talk to, right? And what Senzilla will do is that it will take all of these people and it will first send them a very personal connection request and then follow-ups, right? And you don't have to engage with everyone. You just have to engage with people who actually end up connecting with you and responding to you. Senzilla stops as soon as someone responds. So it's just taking out the time that you would have put in to get that first response, and freeing up that time for you to spend elsewhere. You're just getting that time back, but you still have to put in time. You have to put in time once the person ends up responding to you. So the very first thing you should look for in any platform is what kind of campaign statistics you can track: acceptance rate, response rate. And you should look at both, and just make sure that you're getting like a decent acceptance rate and a decent response rate to tweak your messaging further. Otherwise, you won't get enough responses. So that's number one. Then you need an inbox to manage the whole process well, right? Like, for example, on LinkedIn, it's so difficult to even do the basics, right? Like if I have to go in and figure out like who has responded to me here and who I need to respond to, it's so difficult, right? Like here I've just responded automatically, and here like this is something that I'm not interested in, just a pitch that I've got. So how do I, like keep this organized? The way to keep it organized is just have filters in here effectively. If LinkedIn did it, like, it would be amazing, where they had a filter that says show me all the conversations where people are awaiting my response. Yeah. And if I filter by unread, it doesn't show me that. It shows me a lot of, you know stuff where even
Junk
I.
mail. I mean, to be honest, it's spam. Like
Yeah,
if we were to think about it from an inbox point of view, if you're on your email, you're calling this spam because these are coming from unknown senders who don't have
yeah,
many connections, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
yeah. It's very difficult to separate the noise from the signal. Yeah. So that's where you need to have aggressive filtering systems. This is just what Sanzilla Inbox has built in. It will auto mark as, people as irrelevant or spam or something, and then you'll be left with a clean inbox where you just filter by people who responded to you. And you just add your LinkedIn account. That's it, and your automation runs in the cloud. There's a robot that attaches to your LinkedIn account and does all of this for you. And this is the one that our customers love the most. Yeah, like, I'm definitely biased, but there's something that they just love. Is actually giving them a compliment based on something that it finds in their profile: volunteer work, licenses, recommendations, and more. And you start much warmer conversations just right away. You don't even have to pitch them to come onto your podcast. Like, you give them a compliment and you just get into a conversation and you just mention it often. By the way, oh, by the way, almost like, by the way, I run this podcast as well, and I was noticing that you do XYZ. I'd love to have you on as a guest. I mean, it would be, I think your story would be interesting to share with our guests. So this is what you need to think of. This is the funnel. Yeah, 80 connection requests a day. Just these are just, like, numbers. It can be anything, but what's important are the ratios. Yeah, 80 connection requests a day, 15 new conversations a day, 7 meetings booked every week. Now you don't need to do this. This is for salespeople mostly to hit a certain number of quota, but for podcasters, you also have to think in terms of these funnels and these ratios. Yeah, what's important is having this mindset. Like, if I come to you as a podcaster and you say, like, you're struggling with booking guests, I'll first ask you, like, what does your funnel look like? What is the conversion rate from here to here? What is the conversion from here to here? And if you
It's
don't know it, yeah,
it's so interesting. I didn't think about how simply this issue could be solved by such a sales software, just kind of cross application.
it's a
Um,
cross application. Yeah,
so
it's
that's a no,
definitely a
it's
cross application.
super valuable.
No, thank you. I mean, when they asked me to come on, how I got here, I was actually, one of our salespeople actually connected with Anas, who is a part of the Podlines team, and he was using this software for a bunch of things. I think to book guests and a lot of this other stuff. And he said, "Hey, wow, this is so this software is so good. Why don't you come on and show them how to use this for guest booking?" I was like, "Oh, wow, I hadn't thought of it at that point as well." But now, thinking back to my podcasting days, I was just instinctively doing it because, I had that sales sort of thinking. Like, I thought in
I
terms of products always.
It's so
So
interesting you say that because I believe that I was recruited in the same way. And so therefore, I mean, I've proved it. If anything, that's a testament to the software itself because I mean, as a marketing person managing budgets, people know to target me. So I get tens of emails a day, whether it's emails, LinkedIn's, etc., and
yeah,
completely do not respond. I
yeah,
can't. I'm going to look it up on my other screen just to figure out why I responded the first time. But I'm
yeah.
sure it was something personal that was pulled out. I believe, just thinking off the top of my head, it was something personal that I was like, well, that actually does apply to what I do. That applies to what I'd be interested in.
Very interesting. Yeah. So that's where the funnel thinking and the AI at the top of the funnel is so important because it will get you healthier conversion rates. From here to here will be much more easy. Yeah. This is our team. I basically started Senzilla last year in the middle of a pandemic, last year, May. And we've now grown to over, this is a bit old, we've now grown to over 800 LinkedIn accounts, over 120 customers on the platform, and 10 employees now in a space of like 12 months. So yeah, good growth. We're very happy with where we are, and we want to go further because there's a lot of cross applications. There's a lot of like people adopting social selling for the first time, and it's a real privilege to be able to see customers get success. Yeah, because uh, I have done startups before, and it's the hardest job on the planet, I feel, like getting traction. So it's always good when someone uses our software and gets some success. So that's always the best thing to hear whenever a customer comes back and says, okay, I got 10 meetings every week, past 2 weeks using Sensilla. Like, wow, you're my hero. And Arun is our CTO. He's the real brains behind it. He is a genius. I mean, there's no other way to put it. He has worked in many Silicon Valley based high growth tech startups before, and he's just like a true 10xer. Like, I'll come up with an idea. I'm an engineer as well. I built the first version of Senzilla, and I took it to like 30 odd customers. But then I looked at Arun. He was my roommate in college, and he was my batchmate, and I've known him for like 12 years now, and he's my best friend as well. It's a real privilege to be able to work with him on this and just grow the business. So yeah, so that's our team, and now we're growing as well.
I'm so glad you said that, as to the backstory around you. I don't know, because it's a very similar thing for Zencaster. That one of the co-founders is a good friend of mine and a mentor, and it's someone who I worked with at TikTok before, and it's
Right.
interesting, and Flipagram before that. It's really interesting to think about the connections that you make when you're a young man or woman. And they being social or otherwise, and then understanding that just by showing up and talking and just being yourself and inquisitive and understanding, like, I'm an engineer, I'm a social media person, I'm this, that, and the third, and we come at things from different ways, and we want to solve similar problems. It's the blessing of working in startups, is that you get to work alongside friends, and people who actually care passionately about changing things the same way. I think many do, and have a hard time, making that effect in larger corporations. As you and I both know, those startups, it's just every hour spent is so useful.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. It's a real privilege, because it's you see the other person grow as well. Like, this dude, he just used to be asleep till like 2 p.m. in the afternoon in the same room, and when we were in engineering together, it's so nice to see them grow as well. Yeah, like from just being like a slacker to being this amazing engineer who's managing like 10 people and is just delivering awesome code.
The personal growth journey alongside your career, alongside your friend, is it's such an amazing thing to see, because I can't even begin to count the amount of times that, even since joining Zencaster in the last 6 months, my friend Adrian, the co-founder, and a few other people who have joined from TikTok, have blown me away because of their maturity and the way that they have elevated their skill set. And I'm sure that in speaking with them, to be honest, they have said the same about me. And it's interesting how you take a couple years apart or work on different projects and yet stay in touch, and that cohesion is still there, and the growth is even higher. It's such a blessing to get to work with people who really want to fix things for people.
I completely agree. I mean, that's just I think work is one of those things that's very misunderstood. Like, people talk about work-life balance and a lot of it. I think if you are able to get into a zone where your work doesn't really feel like work, right? Because you're so excited to just go and work with your friend, or work on things that actually make someone's life easier. Like, I can't, like, for me, the most happy feeling while working on Senzera is when someone comes in with a support query, and we sort of fix some issue within like 5 minutes, because we're both engineers and we just have really fast deployment processes. It's just and we tell them, hey, it's fixed, now go check it. For them, it's like magic, like, to get a fast response and a fast resolution and all of that. So that's something that never really gets old, right? Like, you're able to keep that satisfaction of being able to be there for your customers. It's there's nothing better. Yeah. No worries. I mean, these are just some of the like feedback we've gotten. Like, this person, he's been with us for a while. Preston is one of our earliest customers, and he's been with us as long as we've been a company. So he loved the AI outreach messages. He loved the efficient management of the entire campaign process. He likes the insights that we actually give out, right? He has some additional requests as well, total number of messages and all. Inbox is great, mark 100 on click and all of that. So it's just some of the, the only critique I have, yeah, is campaigns start running at weird times. The reason we start running it at weird times is that LinkedIn doesn't figure out a pattern and think it's spam. Yeah, like if you wake up every day at 9 a.m. and send like 10 messages, LinkedIn will think you're using automation and you're doing spamming, which is not the case. That's why we run it at weird times. So this is just like, for me, it's done. Yeah, like there's nothing else that I would love to